Welcome back to the WWIA Podcast. We hope you're enjoying this special podcast series on the John McDaniel story. If you are, please do us a favor and leave us a review on iTunes, Spotify, or your preferred podcast service. Let's learn more about John's military service as we dive into Part 7, Joint Southern Surveillance Reconnaissance Operations Center in the Florida Keys.
Okay, I'm back. All right, so if you're following the bouncing ball on my career podcast here, where we're at is, I think where I left off was PERSCOM, the Personnel Command there in D.C., and and so I didn't get that job to be President Bush's number 43, being his aide-de-camp. And so what basically happened then is I shifted gears, in the midst, very much still in the midst and throes of 911, which is very, at the time, still very raw and very prevalent, especially, in the nation's capital, as it's sort of uncertain in the military what we're going to do after this, horrific attack. But we certainly know that we're going to do something. And those of us who were wearing a uniform at the time absolutely beyond a shadow of a doubt knew that America would respond. The question was, what were we going to do, and where were we going to do it? And and eventually, history solves the mystery for you, and we know what we did, and we know where we did it, and that's not the purpose of this discussion today, but nonetheless, as I recall, there were U.S. flags flying everywhere, and in D.C., which was attacked, as I mentioned, the terrorists flying, planes, into obviously the Twin Towers there in New York, and then of course, the Pentagon was attacked about a mile from where I was. And the whole, Timothy Maud story that I shared with you earlier. So that's my frame of mind at the time, and I thought I was going to get that job to be President Bush's aide-de-camp, and I did not, and I wasn't really disappointed. I think they got the right guy for that job, and I was just honored to be, in the hunt, in the consideration. I think there was 4 candidates that were offered, and so that's a pretty thin cut, and just felt pretty honored to be considered to be his aide-de-camp. So here I am back at D.C., in my little assignment officer chair, making assignments for space operations officers and public affairs officers, and have my fingers a little bit in the Army astronaut program. So that's kind of my life. And then all of a sudden one day, the telephone rings, and it's one of the guys out there in the field. And part of my job, not only making assignments, when I say making assignments, that means you get orders, not suggestions, and I cut the orders. They have official ways there of having assignment officers cut the orders. And when orders get cut, they very, very rarely do they ever get rescinded, and they don't take them back. So if you get a set of orders sending you off to Korea, guess what? Pack your bags, you're going to Korea, sort of thing. So, and all of us who raised our right hand and said they would, swear to uphold the Constitution of the United States of America and the orders of the officers appointed over them, then, you kind of know that's what those are. Those are orders. They're not suggestions. They don't say, would you please? They start out with, you will. That's an order, sort of thing. You will proceed, is I think how most orders start. Anyway, so that's what I did. I was cutting orders for guys and gals, and it's now the landscape's changed. We know we're going to war, and so when you got a set of orders, I think everybody, in that time period, just post 911, let's just say that your senses were a little calibrated at the time. As mine certainly were as well. So, that was my job, and I was doing it. I think I did a pretty good job of doing that. And oh, by the way, it's kind of a thankless job. because, there's usually one of two things that happens. You have a smiley face if you get a set of orders that you like, or you have a sad face if you don't get a set of orders that you like, if you don't like the orders you got, and there's very, very little, sort of indifference to orders. You get orders, you're either happy or sad. That's my experience. And so, a lot of guys try to talk you out of it. Well, I got this, I got that. And I'm like, I was, at the end of the day, somebody's got to go to that job. I know nobody wants to go, but there's only, for example, 2 of you that fit the genotype, have the skill set, and are available, and so it's one of you 2 guys going. And, so guys used to always give you the ball ache about, I'm going to get I'm going to get my chain of command involved. I'm going to get my 2-star involved. And I used to say, okay, that's fine. Let me explain something to you there, cowboy. There's this little thing called the Rules of the Potomac. And for those of you that don't know, the Rules of the Potomac have to do with generals, with how many stars you have on your shoulder. And divisions, where these guys and gals are going to go, where I'm sending them off to divisions for the most part, there's typically, 2-star commander at the division level, and in the PERSCOM parlance, there is, there's the 2-star, in that case, Dorian Anderson, at the time, and then the 3-star General Maud, who's the DESPER, Deputy Chief of Staff for Personnel. So if I need it, I got 3 stars, and my 3 stars trump your 2 stars, so suck it up, you're going to Korea, sort of thing, that's what it really boiled down to. And it didn't happen that often. Most guys understood, that they had to go do these jobs. And so, but it was a tough job. Being at PERSCOM's a tough job. And they always say, if you leave PERSCOM, and as you recall, I went there dragging my feet. I didn't want to do that job, but I did. And it's like, I didn't want to be an S4 either, but I did the best I could. And I certainly did the best I could with the job there at Personnel Command. And so, anyway, they always say, if you leave PERSCOM as an assignment officer without an assignment that you like, in other words, happy face, then you got nobody to blame but yourself, okay? And that's true. So the phone rings, and it's this guy by the name of Timothy Mango, and he's a major, and he introduces himself as an aviation officer who would like to be a functional area 40 guy, or, is retiring, getting ready to retire after 20 years, and he thinks that the job he's in ought to be recoded as a functional area 40 job for space operations guys. And part of my charter at the time was not only to make assignments for space operations officers and public affairs officers and dabble in the Army astronaut program. My job was also to recode as many jobs as I could, or that were appropriate to recode from a standard billet, say, calling for a combat arms officer, as an example, to a functional area 40 space ops job, if it made sense for the Army to do so. Like, hey, this is a very technical job. It's heavy in space operations. It's all before this, functional area, OPMS 21 thing that we're doing. And so I was doing that as well. I was recoding positions if it had space in its title, or dealt with space or space operations assets or activity, and it made sense for us. I would typically have it recoded, and there was a process for that. It wasn't just a unilateral decision, but I was pretty good at convincing my bosses, plural, that these are the billets that are the most career enhancing and oh, by the way, important for us to fill with this new functional area of space operations dudes and dudettes. So this phone call comes from Tim Mango, who was a major at the time in a little place called he was the director of operations for an organization called the JSSROC. Okay, that's Joint Southern Surveillance Reconnaissance Operations Center, JSSROC. Okay, it's not well known, and oh, by the way, it no longer exists. It was consumed and it's morphed into something else, so you won't find it on the AM dial out there. But I'll tell you what it was, which was fascinating to me. This job included basically cobbling together by whatever means through an integrated common operational picture, all kinds of assets, okay? Ground-based radars, aerostat radars, air breathers, planes, space systems, maritime systems, and human intelligence all into this common operational picture for the entire Southern Cone. So that's Central America, South America, and lots of territory in the Caribbean, et cetera, et cetera. And so there was an organization. It's still being performed. It's just by somebody else that put all this together. It was 100% military. There was no interagency anything. It was all military. And that job was an 04 or major's job, 04, 05 job. And the guy or gal who got it got to be the director of operations, an S3 operational assignment. And I thought to myself, yes. Okay, that sounds great. So Tim and I chatted about it. I actually went down there and looked at it. He sent me a PowerPoint slide, and I was super convinced that this was a great opportunity for somebody. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought that somebody should probably be me. I'm not going to be the president's aide, so why don't I go be the director of operations at JSSROC down in, guess what? Key West, Florida. That's right, the Florida Keys, sports fans. And if you're following the bouncing ball, that meets one of Johnny Mac's criteria, which is world-class outdoor sporting activities available at your fingertips, i.e. one of the greatest fisheries in the planet. So I thought, boy, this is perfect. This is lining up really good for me. And so, I convinced my boss to have it recoded, and then I nominated myself for the position. Of course, it was approved, by my boss, and my bosses, plural. And, I went smoking down to Key West and got there right after 9/11. It was, it was in early 2002, and it was a 3-year joint nominative assignment. Okay. Now, P.S., I will tell you that after 9/11, in all fairness, I did go to my boss, and I was already on orders when this happened. When 9/11, happened, I'd already had the orders cut, and I had them in my hand, and was preparing myself to go to down to the Florida Keys to do this job at JSSROC, and of course they flew planes into our buildings, and I knew that meant war, and I went to my boss and I said, "Hey, sir, look at, I don't know how I feel about going down to the Florida Keys, considering that we're fixing to go to war here. The drum beat is loud and clear, and there's some shock and awe about to happen. And I just don't think maybe the Florida Keys is the best place for me." And he goes, "Well, John, here's the deal. Okay, somebody's got to do that job, and you're already on orders, and so you might as well just go do it. This war is going to be here for a long time." And absolutely is right. 20 years, plus, and we're still fighting global war on terror. If you want a news flash, it's still happening. It's just not on the front newspaper or on the television every day, but it's still certainly happening. And so I did. I thought it was. I appreciated him saying that, and I did have a little bit of guilt about going down there. I'm just being honest, but I got down there, and that's why I ultimately, coming out of there, decided to go back to SOCOM. It was a decision that I made to, volunteer and go back to Special Operations Command, one more for the Gipper, if you will. But I'll get to that in a second when I go into the last chapter, which is SOCOM. But, here we are at JSSROC. I get to be a director of operations for an all-military organization. There's plenty of brown shoe Navy guys. Those are pilots. Black shoe Navy guys. Those are the seamen, the maritime guys that run the ships. And there was plenty of Air Force in that mix that understood the air picture, if you will, and the various different assets that the Air Force has that help us understand a common operational picture. Plenty of airmen available, plenty of Navy guys. I think there was 1 or 2 Army guys, and I was it. And I think we had 1 Marine, if not 2, maybe, on the staff. And the skipper was actually the former air boss on the JFK. carrier, a guy by the name of Shuchuk, Bill Shuchuk, great guy, great boss. He totally let me be me and his director of operations, and I learned a lot. And I relied a lot on the expertise of the enlisted men and the officers that worked for me there at JSSROC, and ultimately, JSSROC was consumed by an interagency task force, our nation's longest standing, at least it was at the time, our nation's longest standing task force. And task forces are designed, around a mission. They're supposed to have a, specific start and specific end date. When the mission's over, they dissolve. But this task force down there, which runs, counter drug and counter terrorist operations, is still around to this day. And still slugging it out. And so, I was part of an entity that helped build better mousetraps. We busted a lot of bad guys, took down a lot of bad guys doing bad things, and proud of that mission set, proud of that organization. And then it integrated into the, as I said, the Interagency Task Force South down there, and to my knowledge, to this day, they're still doing that job. And it's an important mission, understanding what's happening in that hemisphere, from lots of different perspectives. But there are a lot of bad guys all over the world. That shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. Certainly is not to me. And to have a strong defense and understand what's happening to our allies and neighboring partnering countries is really important, and to assist where we can with helping them defend their borders, their territorial integrity, their sovereignty, and all these things are super important. So I did a lot of traveling, all over the Caribbean, all over Central South America, and made a lot of friends, and I think moved the needle a little bit in helping take down some people that needed to be taken down, I guess is the best way to say that. So anyway, I won't belabor too much on that mission, but I thought you might find that kind of interesting. But I think the thing that I wanted to communicate, in addition to the job, if you will, was my introduction to saltwater, and my rhythm. Like anybody else, you go to work. Military doesn't know a 9-to-5 thing. If you got to work, you got to work. Something going on, you're going to work and you're staying to work. Until it's okay not to be at work, right? And so, there really isn't such thing as a weekend when you're in a leadership position. Because you're on call and this, that, and the other thing. And I had a bat phone in my home, right in my bedroom. The red secure phone, all this stuff. And so, but there was this is the time I think Blackberries are coming around. So, you could get a hold of me if you wanted to. I was just, when I wasn't at work, I was on the water. And I was learning saltwater, and I was just fascinated, absolutely fascinated. It was my first time to ever, and I bought a flat skiff, a Mako 181 flat skiff, and in preparation for going down to the Florida Keys, which is the perfect platform. If it's got a poling platform and a push pole and an engine, obviously, to get the boat to where you want it to go, but it's designed to go in fish in very shallow or skinny water. And so the Florida Keys, the big three down there that everybody chases are, the tarpon, the bonefish, and the permit. Those three fish, I spent exclusively like 99% of my time, most of which was solo. Okay, understanding the tides in these three different species of fish, and where they would be, when they would be, how to get them to bite, what kind of baits to use, all of that. So I immersed myself in that space. When I was not at work, I was on the water, and I took it as as serious as I do anything that I'm interested in. And so I learned. I got I went to school, and got my captain's license, my 6-pack. So I'm a certified Coast Guard, 6-pack guy. I went through the course, got my license, and practiced, being a 6-pack captain for hire, sort of on a side job, a little bit of that. So I understood how to, do that and do customer service well in that space. Work for people really hard on the water. I didn't need the money, but I enjoyed doing the work, and I think it brings my A game out if I know I got to perform. For somebody other than myself, that has a tendency to elevate my game. So I thought it was important to be able to try to compete on that space with some of those amazing guides, and I, in the process, probably really pissed off a lot of people. Because the guides are very sensitive to their turf, if you will. That's how they make their living. And here's this guy who, doesn't really need to be doing it, is, edging in on their space. I thought I was pretty good about, paying respect and deference to their lifestyle and living and everything without, being too competitive. But I did it. I loved it. I learned a lot about saltwater fishing and absolutely fell in love with it. I was like, wow. Before that, I was I'd done every kind of fishing that you could imagine. I'd been in Alaska, so I'd fly fished. I grew up in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, on a lake, freshwater. I mean, I'd done it. I'd done a lot of fishing all over the country, and in the world, as a matter of fact. And when I hit the saltwater and got a chance to get on those flats and chase those fish. I say chase them, shallow water fishing is like hunting, if you ask me. Your eyes are a very, very valuable asset because, if you got a good set of polarized glasses and you're up on a platform and you've positioned the boat proper vis-a-vis the sun, then, you've got an advantage, your perspective, you can see into the water, especially clear water like, you see down in the Florida Keys. So, and it's one thing to see the fish and spot the fish, but it's another thing to go get them and actually get them to bite, And so when you do that, to me, that's like one of the hardest things on the planet to do as a sportsman, to catch those 3 fish and let alone catch all three of those in one day. That's called a grand slam, and that's a very high bar. It's a very high standard, to accomplish. So it gave me, a great deal of incentive, to get good and practice. And when you can accomplish that, for me, there's a huge amount of satisfaction. Because on a scale of 1 to 10, like 10 being difficult and 1 being easy, catching any one of those 3 fish on any given day is extremely difficult. It just is. Just to get to where they are is challenging. But to get them to bite, is something else. But to get all 3 of them in one day, I mean, that represents a very high standard, and I love high standards. And so, that means challenge and accomplishment in my language, like for me personally. So, there's a lot of that's unrecorded because I was out there by myself. And I later went back and bought a home down there and lived out of it for a couple of years, after I left active duty. So, I mean, I absolutely love the Florida Keys. Now I'm here, in Tampa land, fishing the bay and raising 2 boys. So, I still have a soft spot in my heart for the Florida Keys, and I hope, to spend more time down there just because it's just that magical of a place. And I'll tell you, one time, I was out there. I'd get off work. Say I got off work at 5 o'clock. Okay, 6 o'clock at the latest, unless there was something going on. I still had a chance, in the summertime, to beat feet home and get on that boat and spend an hour and a half, before the failing sunlight, out in the backcountry, in the middle of nowhere, learning the waters and how to catch these, amazing fish. So, and I did that like every every opportunity I got, rain, sun, sleet, no sleet in the Florida Keys, but, I just did it. And one time I was out there, and I'll never forget this. ever. I wished I had it recorded, or I wish somebody was there to experience it with me. But, I enjoy, like an alpinist, right? I enjoy being by myself out there. It's not the same experience. I don't get the same satisfaction. I love being with other people and sharing that. And I do that now for a living. But if you ask me, like, what's your favorite thing to do and who would you do it with? Save for maybe my boys, I would do it alone. And it's no offense to anybody. It's just how I'm wired. I like to trap alone. I like to hunt alone. I like to fish alone. Just, I don't know. I mean, I can't really, explain why that is. It's just, it's an intensely personal experience for me, and I don't have to worry about entertaining people. I don't have to worry about, disappointing people. I don't have to worry about anything but me and whatever it is I'm doing. So I don't know, maybe that helps, maybe that doesn't, I don't know. It's just the way that it is. And so I'm out there and the sun's setting. I'm out in this little place called Jewfish Basin, which is someplace between Sugarloaf Shores at 17, where I lived, and Key West, which is mile marker 0, but on the backcountry side, not the Atlantic side, but the backcountry side, towards the Gulf, and there's nobody out there. 0, which happens all the time, which is why I love it. I've just seen some amazing things back there. Anyway, so I'm getting ready to, I come off a plane in my skiff, well before my hunting grounds, and I coast in, I shut everything off, and I'm getting ready to get up on a flat and start fishing for maybe an hour before the sun goes down. And there's no wind, 0, nothing. I mean, like, it's 0 degrees wind, and the sun's setting, and the water is like glass. It's like ice. It's like a sheet of ice, and I've never seen it like that in the Florida Keys, ever. And it's so quiet that my ears are hurting. Like, it's like screaming at me, like complete sensory deprivation. And it wasn't until that moment in my life where I heard because I thought about it a lot. It was amazing. I didn't, I had a BlackBerry. I couldn't record, and even if I did, you'd still lose, you'd lose the experience. It wouldn't do what it wouldn't do for you what it did for me being there. So anyway, the saying, the silence was deafening. I mean, you've probably heard that. I've heard it, but I never really knew what that meant until I had that experience, and it was just so cool. That didn't have anything to do with catching a fish. I don't know if I caught a fish that day or not, but I do remember that event, and it'll never leave me. It was absolutely one of the more magical times of my life out in, the outdoors, doing the things that I do out there. So anyway, I just thought I'd share that with you. So what happens is, to wrap up the whole JSSROC IATF Florida Keys thing, it was a 3-year assignment, and about a year before my time was up, this is probably 2004 time frame, knowing that I'm retiring in 07 because I got my 20. I got one more 2-year assignment in me, and that's it. And so what I figure is, hey, what's the best chance of me, getting into a job that's really meaningful, that could impact the global war on terror, and really make the best contribution that I could make to the country in support of this effort. Where I asked myself, where is that? And since I know the guy at PERSCOM because he replaced me, I figure, I could probably get there, right? And I know a lot of people at this stage of the game, so I start making some phone calls, and the place I settle on is SOCOM, Special Operations Command, and one of the 2 most powerful combatant commands on the planet, right here at MacDill Air Force Base. And I'm thinking to myself, I got to go there. I mean, these guys are got their hands full. At this stage, 2004, I'm looking at being there in 05. We've been at the war for a couple years now. Shock and awe has happened. We're fighting in Iraq. There's still stuff going on in Afghanistan, trying to hunt down, Osama bin Laden. And, 05, 6, and 7, if you were keeping track, were pretty bad years for the home team. We got our boys chewed up pretty good over there. And, so I was like, I got to do something. I think this makes the most sense for me. Give the Gipper one more for the Gipper, find a hard job, and go do your best. And so that's what I did. I started making phone calls, and then a guy by the name of Del Daly, 2-star aviation guy, special operations aviation guy, was running the interagency task force. Or I take it back. He wanted to develop an interagency task force at SOCOM, similar to what was happening where I was working in the Keys, and SOCOM was jumped into, of all places, Key West with a contingent to include Del Daly, a 2-star general, and I pulled him out of the water, in RB-15 and brought them all to shore. And that's when I really got my hooks in SOCOM, but I had a lot of friends over there anyway, so I did make a few phone calls. Frank Kearney was over there, a 3-star general. I'd served with him. I mentioned his name several times, commanded for him, yada, yada. So I was like, I know I can go to SOCOM. That's the best thing for me. So that's what happened. And I'll talk about that. But en route, before they let me go to SOCOM, they said, you got to go to the Joint Forces Staff College. I'm like, okay, man, another college? You want me to go another year to another college? Yep. I was like, man, okay. All right, if I got to do it, I got to do it. And it was deemed that I got to do it. So if you're counting in a 20-year career, that's 3 colleges that they made me go to. Well, one, I didn't have to get my MBA, but I did. So, it's 3rd college. And this one's in Suffolk or Norfolk. I think it's Norfolk. They call it Norfolk, Virginia. Suffolk or Norfolk, Virginia. Norfolk is what most people say. But that's where it was, the Joint Forces Staff College, so you could learn how to be a staff chogi. But, I'd been a staff chogi before. It was just one of those schools that I didn't think, quite frankly, was, it was a good school. Don't get me wrong, because you're in there with your joint brethren and sisters. There's Air Force, Navy, Marines, Coast Guard, you name it. They're all there, and they're in the grade of 05, I think all pretty much 04, 05. I think all 05s, so lieutenant colonels equivalent are there, and so am I. And so, I got through the school. I don't have really anything to say about that other than a deer hunting story that I might add, because you might chuckle. I'll add that maybe as a special add-on when I'm all done with this thing, but I won't bore you now. But yeah, so I go to the Joint Forces Staff College and I graduate, and then I show up at SOCOM. So in 2005, okay, I am at SOCOM. Okay, I bought a house in Apollo Beach. I am at SOCOM, and I got 2 years, to serve before I get my 20. And that's where I'm going to leave off for this chapter. We'll pick it up at SOCOM, Special Operations Command, when I do the last and final segment, okay? And there it is. Hope you enjoyed that.
To learn more about the mission of the Wounded Warriors in Action Foundation and how you can get involved, please visit our website at WWIAF.org or follow our social media pages on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Thank you for listening to the WWIA Podcast and for helping us honor, connect, and heal our combat wounded Purple Heart heroes through the power of the great outdoors.
If you like what you're listening to here and would like to join our team in our mission to bring healing power and recovery to America's Purple Heart heroes, please become part of our Sponsor a Hero team by clicking on the link in the podcast notes or by going to WWIAF.org/sponsor. That's WWIAF.org/sponsor. Our heroes need you now more than ever. Thank you.